What happens when the moment you planned for everyone to watch becomes the day your husband turns the tables? How could a simple envelope handed to me at the altar change everything and expose the truth I thought I'd hidden? Can you really win by humiliating someone, or is there always a price to pay? The champagne bubbles caught the restaurant's ambient lighting perfectly as I raised my glass, watching Julian's eyes sparkle with that familiar mischief. Around our table, the engagement party buzzed with conversation, but I could feel Nathan's tension radiating beside me like heat from a furnace. "To Evelune," Julian announced, his voice carrying that theatrical quality that made him so compelling in his creative director role. "My forever muse, now becoming someone else's wife." The toast sent ripples of uncomfortable laughter through our guests. My mother Clara beamed with approval, her social climbing instincts recognizing a dramatic moment worth savoring. But Nathan's hand slipped from mine under the table, and I caught the sharp intake of breath from his mother Maggie across from us. "Julian, you're too much," I laughed, playing up the sophisticated woman-of-the-world persona I'd cultivated. "Nathan knows he's marrying someone with a rich history of meaningful connections." Nathan's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. After 3 years together, I'd learned to read his micro-expressions. He was mortified, but his Midwestern politeness would never let him make a scene. That predictability was both comforting and, if I'm being honest, a little boring. "It takes real maturity to maintain friendships after romantic relationships end," I continued, addressing the table, but really speaking to Nathan. "Some people see it as threatening, but I think it shows emotional intelligence." My father Alan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Unlike my mother, he'd never warmed to my modern approach to relationships. His traditional sensibilities were offended by Julian's presence, but he'd bite his tongue rather than embarrass me publicly. "Emotional intelligence," Julian repeated with a grin. "That's what I've always admired about Evie. She doesn't let society's hang-ups dictate her connections." Nathan's brother Oliver watched the exchange with barely concealed disgust. At 32, he was more direct than Nathan, less willing to smooth over awkwardness for the sake of social harmony. "So, Julian," Oliver said, his tone deceptively casual, "what's your role in the wedding? Groomsman? +1? The question hung in the air like smoke. I felt Nathan tense beside me, probably dreading my answer. "Actually," I said, savoring the moment, "Julian's going to walk me down the aisle." The silence that followed was deafening. Maggie's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. Alan's fork clattered against his plate. Even my mother looked momentarily stunned before recovering her composure. "How wonderfully unconventional," Clara managed, though her voice sounded strained. Nathan turned to stare at me, his brown eyes wide with disbelief. "Evelune, we never discussed. I thought I'd surprise you," I said, reaching for his hand. He didn't pull away, but his fingers remained limp in mine. "Julian was such an important part of my journey to finding myself. It feels right to have him help me transition to this new chapter." "Your father is sitting right here," Nathan said quietly. "Oh, Alan understands," I waved dismissively. "Don't you, Dad? You've never been one for traditional ceremonies anyway." My father's face had gone ashen. He opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly struggling with how to respond without causing a scene. "I think," Maggie said, her voice tight with controlled anger, "that some traditions exist for good reasons." "Like what?" I challenged. "Patriarchal ownership rituals. The idea that a woman needs to be given away by one man to another." "Like respect," Oliver interjected. "For your fiancé, for your family, for the people who care about you." Julian leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the drama he'd helped create. "I think what Evie is doing takes real courage, breaking free from societal expectations, choosing love over convention." "Is that what we're calling it?" Nathan's voice was barely above a whisper, but everyone heard it. The table fell silent again. I could feel the other diners starting to notice our tension. This wasn't going according to plan. I'd expected some initial resistance, but I'd thought Nathan would ultimately support me once he saw how important this was to me. "Nathan," I said, using the patient tone I reserved for particularly difficult HR situations, "I know this is outside your comfort zone, but—" "My comfort zone?" He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Evelune, can we talk privately?" I glanced around the table, acutely aware of the eyes on us. "Can't it wait? We're in the middle of celebrating." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. Now, his tone brooked no argument. I followed him to a quiet corner near the restaurant's bar, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. This was supposed to be my moment, my chance to show everyone how evolved and confident I was. Instead, Nathan was making me look like a child being scolded. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed, his usual composure finally cracking. "I'm being honest about who I am," I shot back. "I'm sorry if that threatens you." "Threatens me?" He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his way of trying to calm down. "Evelune, you're having your ex-boyfriend walk you down the aisle at our wedding. How is that not humiliating?" "Only if you let it be. Julian and I are friends now. Our romantic relationship ended years ago." "Did it?" The question caught me off guard. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're still performing for him." "That's ridiculous." "Is it? You light up when he's around. You quote things he's said. You dress differently when you know you'll see him." Nathan's voice grew quieter, more hurt than angry. "And now you want him to walk you down the aisle, while I stand there like an idiot waiting to marry someone who clearly wishes she was with someone else." The accusation stung because it contained just enough truth to be dangerous. Julian and I had maintained what I preferred to call an emotional connection. We texted regularly, met for coffee, shared inside jokes and memories. It was sophisticated, mature, the kind of relationship that proved I was above petty jealousy and possessiveness. "You're being paranoid," I said, "and honestly a little pathetic." Nathan flinched as if I'd slapped him. "Pathetic?" I didn't mean, but I had meant it, at least partially. His insecurity, his need for traditional relationship boundaries, his inability to see the beauty in what Julian and I shared. It all felt so small-minded. "No, you're right," he said, his voice hollow. "I am being pathetic. Pathetic for thinking my fiancée would prioritize my feelings over her ex-boyfriend's ego. Pathetic for believing you when you said you wanted to marry me." "I do want to marry you." "Do you? Or do you want to marry the idea of me, the stable software engineer who'll provide security while you keep your real emotional life elsewhere?" The question hit too close to home. I'd never articulated it that way, but there was something appealing about having Nathan's steady reliability alongside Julian's creative passion. Why should I have to choose between security and excitement? "That's not fair," I said. "Isn't it?" He looked back toward our table, where Julian was regaling the group with some animated story, while our family sat in uncomfortable silence. "Look at him. He's loving this. He gets to play the romantic lead, while I'm cast as the boring husband-to-be. You're overthinking this." "Am I? Because from my perspective, you just announced to our families that another man is more important to you than I am." "That's not what I said. It's what you meant." Nathan's shoulders sagged with exhaustion. "Evelune, I can't do this anymore." "Can't do what?" "Compete with a ghost. Julian isn't your friend. He's your escape hatch. Every time our relationship requires actual commitment or sacrifice, you run to him for validation." "You're being dramatic." "Am I? Name one time in the past year when you've chosen my feelings over his." I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it. The examples weren't coming as easily as they should have. "That's what I thought," Nathan said. He looked older suddenly, worn down by months of competing for my attention. "I'm going home." "Nathan, wait." But he was already walking away, stopping briefly at our table to make polite excuses before disappearing into the night. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. This wasn't how the evening was supposed to go. When I returned to the table, the mood had shifted dramatically. Julian was still holding court, but the laughter felt forced. Maggie looked like she was fighting back tears, while Oliver stared at his plate with barely contained fury. "Everything okay, honey?" my mother asked, though her eyes were bright with curiosity rather than concern. "Fine," I said, sliding back into my seat. "Nathan just needed some air. You know how he gets with crowds." It was a lie, but a convenient one. Nathan was actually quite social when he wanted to be. He'd left because I'd humiliated him, but admitting that would undermine the narrative I was trying to construct. "Poor thing," Clara said with false sympathy. "He seemed a bit overwhelmed." Julian raised his glass again. "Well, more champagne for the rest of us. To Evie for having the courage to live authentically." As the others reluctantly raised their glasses, I caught Oliver's eye. His expression was one of pure disgust, and for the first time that evening, I felt a flicker of doubt about the path I was choosing. But I pushed it down. Nathan would come around. He always did. The Cole family dinner 2 weeks later was a minefield of unspoken tension. Nathan had barely spoken to me since the engagement party, communicating mainly through terse text messages and polite but distant conversation when absolutely necessary. I'd hoped this dinner would provide an opportunity to smooth things over, but the atmosphere in Maggie's dining room felt thick with disapproval. "The roast is delicious, Mrs. Cole," I said, trying to inject some warmth into the conversation. "Thank you," Maggie replied without looking at me. She'd been icily polite all evening, a marked change from her usual maternal warmth. Nathan sat beside me, mechanically cutting his food and responding to direct questions with minimal words. Oliver kept shooting glances between us, clearly aware of the tension but unsure how to address it. "So," I said, deciding to address the elephant in the room, "I know there was some confusion about the wedding arrangements at the engagement party." The silence that followed was deafening. Nathan's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "I want everyone to understand that having Julian walk me down the aisle isn't meant to diminish anyone else's role," I continued. "It's about honoring all the relationships that have shaped me." "Shaped you how exactly?" Oliver asked, his tone deceptively casual. "Julian was instrumental in helping me discover who I really am. Our relationship taught me so much about emotional intimacy and authentic connection." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Authentic connection." "Yes, the kind of bond that transcends traditional categories. We were lovers, yes, but we evolved into something deeper. Soulmates, in a way." "Soulmates," Maggie repeated, her voice flat. "I know it sounds unconventional, but Julian understands parts of me that—" I glanced at Nathan, then decided to push forward, "that maybe others don't access as easily." "Others meaning your fiancé?" Oliver's question was sharp. "Meaning anyone who hasn't shared that particular type of intimate connection with me." Nathan set down his fork with deliberate precision. "Evelune, can we please not do this here?" "Do what?" "Have an honest conversation about my feelings. Have a conversation about your ex-boyfriend at my mother's dinner table. He's not my ex-boyfriend anymore. He's my friend, my very dear friend who I want to honor at our wedding." "By having him perform a role traditionally reserved for the bride's father," Maggie said. Her composure was cracking, revealing the hurt underneath. "While your actual father sits in the pews watching another man escort his daughter." "My father understands." "Does he? Have you actually asked him how he feels about being replaced?" The question caught me off guard. I'd assumed my father would go along with my decision, as he usually did. His quiet nature meant he rarely voiced objections to my choices, which I'd always interpreted as support. "It's not about replacement," I said. "It's about expansion. Why limit ourselves to traditional roles when we can create something more meaningful?" "More meaningful to whom?" Nathan asked quietly. "To me." To Julian. To everyone who believes in evolved relationships. What about what's meaningful to me? Nathan's voice was barely above a whisper, but everyone heard it. What about what's meaningful to our families? Your feelings matter, of course, but not as much as Julian's. That's not what I said. It's what you meant. Nathan pushed back from the table. Every time we have this conversation, it comes back to what Julian wants, what Julian thinks, what Julian needs. You're being unfair. Am I? Because it seems to me like you're planning our wedding around another man's comfort. Maggie cleared her throat. Maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I always thought a wedding was supposed to be about the couple getting married. It is about us, I insisted. It's about me bringing my whole self to the marriage, including my important friendships. Important friendships don't usually involve having your former lover walk you down the aisle, Oliver said bluntly. Former being the operative word. Is it, though? Nathan stood up abruptly. Because you spend more time texting him than talking to me. You quote him in conversations. You light up when his name comes up in a way you never do when discussing our future. That's not true. Isn't it? When was the last time you talked about our honeymoon with the same enthusiasm you show when discussing Julian's latest creative project? The question hung in the air. I searched for an answer, but the truth was that Julian's work was more interesting to discuss than hotel reservations and tourist attractions. I'm going for a walk, Nathan said, grabbing his jacket from the back of his chair. Nathan, wait. But he was already gone, leaving me alone with his family's disapproving stares. Well, I said, trying to salvage the situation, he's obviously more upset about this than I realized. Obviously, Oliver said dryly. Maggie began clearing plates with sharp, efficient movements. Evelune, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you love my son? The question should have been easy to answer, but something in her tone made me hesitate. Yes, of course I do. Do you love Julian more? It's not about more or less, it's about different types of love. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give. Love isn't a competition. Isn't it? Maggie set down the plates and looked at me directly. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like Julian is winning. The accusation stung. That's not fair. What's not fair is watching my son compete for his own fiancée's attention. He's not competing. He's losing, Oliver interrupted, and he knows it. We all know it. You don't understand the situation. I understand that you're about to marry a man while publicly declaring that another man is more important to you. Julian isn't more important. He's differently important. Keep telling yourself that, Oliver said, standing to help his mother clear the table. But don't expect Nathan to keep pretending it's true. I sat alone at the dining table, listening to the sounds of dishes being washed in the kitchen. The conversation had gone worse than I'd expected. I'd thought that explaining my perspective would help them understand, but instead, I'd somehow made things worse. My phone buzzed with a text from Julian. How's dinner with the in-laws? Surviving the suburban domesticity? Despite everything, I smiled. Julian always knew exactly what to say to make me feel understood. Barely, I texted back. They're not handling the wedding plans well. Their loss. You're creating something beautiful and authentic. Nathan walked out. He'll come around, and if he doesn't, maybe that tells you something important. I stared at the message for a long moment. What did it tell me if Nathan couldn't accept Julian's role in my life? Was I asking too much, or was he offering too little? When Nathan returned an hour later, his family had retreated to the living room, leaving us alone in the kitchen. Feel better? I asked. Not really. He leaned against the counter, looking exhausted. Evelune, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay. Are you still in love with Julian? The question hit like a physical blow. Nathan, just answer the question. Are you still in love with him? I wanted to say no immediately, but the word stuck in my throat. My relationship with Julian was complicated, layered with history, an emotional intimacy that I'd never fully untangled. "It's complicated," I finally said. Nathan's face crumpled. "It's complicated. What Julian and I have isn't romantic anymore, but there's still a deep connection." "Stop." Nathan held up his hand. "Just stop. You asked for honesty. I did, and you just told me everything I needed to know." He walked toward the door, then paused. "For the record, Evelune, it's not complicated. Either you love me enough to put our relationship first, or you don't. And based on everything that's happened, I'm starting to think you don't." As he left me alone in his mother's kitchen, I felt a strange mix of anger and panic. Why couldn't he understand that my feelings for Julian didn't diminish what we had? Why did everything have to be so black and white? But even as I tried to rationalize my position, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that maybe Nathan was right. Maybe it really wasn't that complicated after all. The wedding rehearsal at St. Mark's Chapel was supposed to be a simple run-through, but I could feel the tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Nathan had barely spoken to me in the 3 days since the dinner at his mother's house, communicating only about logistics and timing. Julian arrived 15 minutes late, as was his habit, sweeping into the chapel with his characteristic dramatic flair. He wore a perfectly tailored navy blazer and carried himself with the confidence of someone who belonged everywhere he went. Sorry, he called out, his voice echoing in the sacred space. Traffic was murder." Father Mackenzie, a patient man in his 60s, who'd been handling weddings for decades, smiled politely. "No problem at all. We're just getting started." I watched Nathan's face as Julian approached. My fiancé's expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the muscle in his jaw working overtime. "Julian," I said, perhaps a bit too brightly, "you remember everyone?" "Of course." Julian shook hands with Father Mackenzie, nodded to the families assembled in the front pews, and completely ignored Nathan. "Shall we begin?" Father Mackenzie asked, consulting his notes. "Now, I understand we have a slightly unconventional arrangement for the processional." "That's right," I said, stepping closer to Julian. "Julian will be escorting me down the aisle." Father Mackenzie glanced at my father, who sat in the front pew, looking like he was attending a funeral rather than his daughter's wedding rehearsal. "And Mr. Morell, you'll be—" "Sitting," my father said quietly. "Apparently." The hurt in his voice was unmistakable, and for a moment I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. This was about creating something meaningful, not adhering to outdated traditions. "All right then," Father Mackenzie said diplomatically. "Mr. Vane, if you could take your position at the back of the church with the bride." As Julian and I walked to the rear of the chapel, I heard Maggie whisper something to Oliver. Her tone was sharp, disapproving. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the symbolism of what we were about to do. "Ready, beautiful?" Julian asked, offering me his arm. "Ready." The music began, a classical piece I'd chosen specifically because Julian had introduced me to the composer. As we started down the aisle, I felt a surge of vindication. This felt right. This felt authentic. But when I looked at Nathan standing at the altar, my confidence wavered. He wasn't looking at me with love or anticipation. He was looking at me like I was a stranger, someone he was seeing clearly for the first time. "Dearly beloved," Father Mackenzie began once we'd completed the processional, "we are gathered here today." The rehearsal proceeded mechanically. Nathan responded to cues with professional precision but no warmth. When we practiced the ring exchange, his hands were steady but cold. During the part where we were supposed to kiss, he barely brushed my lips. "Excellent," Father Mackenzie said when we'd finished. "I think we're all set for tomorrow." The rehearsal dinner was held at the country club, where Nathan's family had been members for 20 years. The private dining room was elegantly appointed, with white linens and fresh flowers, but the atmosphere felt more like a wake than a celebration. Julian, seemingly oblivious to the tension, regaled the table with stories from his latest advertising campaign. He was charming and funny, as always, but I noticed that fewer people were laughing than usual. So then the client says, "Can you make it more emotional?" And I said, "Sir, we're selling breakfast cereal, not performing Shakespeare." Julian finished with a flourish. A few polite chuckles followed. My mother smiled appreciatively, but even she seemed subdued. "Julian," Oliver said suddenly, "can I ask you something?" "Shoot." "What exactly is your role here? I mean, beyond walking Evelune down the aisle." Julian glanced at me, then back at Oliver. "I'm here as Evie's friend, someone who's known her intimately and wants to support her transition into marriage." "Known her intimately," Nathan repeated, his voice flat. "Well, yes. We were together for 2 years. You don't just erase that kind of connection." "Most people try to," Maggie said sharply. "Most people are afraid of emotional complexity," Julian replied smoothly. "Evie and I have evolved beyond traditional categories. We're soul partners now." "Soul partners," Nathan said. He set down his wineglass with deliberate care. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means we understand each other on a level that transcends romance. We're connected spiritually, creatively, emotionally." "And physically?" The question came from Oliver, but I could see Nathan waiting for the answer. Julian smiled that enigmatic smile I'd always found so attractive. "Our connection isn't limited by conventional boundaries." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt like I was watching a car accident in slow motion, unable to stop the collision, but powerless to look away. "I see," Nathan said quietly. He stood up from the table. "If you'll excuse me, I need some air." "Nathan," I started to rise, but he held up a hand. "Stay. Enjoy your soul partner." He walked out of the dining room, leaving 30 guests staring after him in shock. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Julian, seemingly unaware of the damage he'd just caused, raised his glass. "To Evie," he said, "for having the courage to live authentically." A few people half-heartedly raised their glasses, but most just stared at their plates. I felt heat rising in my cheeks as I realized how this must look to everyone else. "Maybe I should go check on Nathan," I said. "Let him go," Julian said, placing a hand on my arm. "He needs to process this. Some people take longer to understand unconventional relationships." "Unconventional," my father repeated, speaking for the first time all evening. "Is that what we're calling it?" "Dad—" "No, Evelune. I've been quiet long enough." Alan Morell rarely raised his voice, but when he did, people listened. "What you're doing isn't unconventional. It's cruel." "That's not fair." "Isn't it? You're humiliating a good man in front of his family and friends. You're making a mockery of your wedding, of your marriage, of everything that's supposed to be sacred about this commitment." "I'm being honest about who I am." "You're being selfish," Oliver said, standing up. "And if you can't see that, then maybe Nathan's better off without you." He left the room, followed by several other guests. Within minutes, half the table had emptied, leaving me sitting with Julian, my parents, and a handful of uncomfortable friends. "Well," my mother said with forced brightness, "that was dramatic." "They'll come around," Julian said confidently. "People always resist change initially." But as I looked around the nearly empty dining room, I wasn't so sure. For the first time since I'd started planning this unconventional wedding, I wondered if I'd pushed too far. My phone buzzed with notifications. Tagged posts from the rehearsal dinner were already appearing on social media. Someone had filmed Julian's soul partner's comment and posted it with the caption, "When your ex crashes your rehearsal dinner." The comments were brutal. "This is so uncomfortable to watch." "Poor groom, run, dude, run." Imagine being this desperate for attention. The second-hand embarrassment is real. I tried to delete the post, but it had already been shared dozens of times. Within an hour, it had gone viral, with thousands of strangers weighing in on my personal life. "Maybe we should call it a night," I said, my voice shaking. Julian squeezed my hand. "Don't let them get to you. You're doing something brave." But as I sat in the empty dining room, watching my carefully planned evening crumble around me, brave was the last thing I felt. I woke up on what was supposed to be my wedding day, to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. My phone had been buzzing all night, but I'd turned off the sound, assuming it was just more social media notifications about the viral rehearsal dinner video. The first message I read made my blood run cold. Nathan, the wedding is off. I've contacted all vendors. Don't try to call me. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. This had to be some kind of mistake. Nathan was upset, sure, but he wouldn't actually call off our wedding. Not like this, not via text message. I scrolled through the other messages, finding variations on the same theme from our wedding party, family members and friends. Heard about the wedding. So sorry, honey. My cousin Lisa. Is it true Nathan cancelled everything? My maid of honor, Sarah. Maybe it's for the best. My college roommate, Jennifer. I tried calling Nathan, but the call went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. On the third attempt, I realized he'd blocked my number. Panic rising in my throat, I called Oliver. What do you want, Evelune? His voice was cold, professional. Where's Nathan? I need to talk to him. He doesn't want to talk to you. Oliver, please. There's been some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, he's done. We're all done. You can't be serious. The wedding is in 6 hours. The wedding was in 6 hours. Nathan spent all night calling vendors, cancelling everything. The church, the reception, the flowers, the photographer, all of it. My legs gave out and I sank onto my bed. He can't just cancel our wedding. He can, and he did. Legally, financially, practically, it's over. But the guests have been notified. Father Mackenzie is handling the church announcement. The country club is dealing with the reception cancellation. Nathan thought of everything. I need to see him. No, you don't. You need to leave him alone. Oliver, please. Evelune, listen to me very carefully. My brother spent 3 years of his life loving someone who was never fully there. Last night, he finally accepted that you never will be. Don't make this harder than it already is. The line went dead. I sat in my empty apartment, still in my pajamas, staring at the wedding dress hanging on my closet door. In a few hours, I should have been getting my hair done, surrounded by my bridesmaids, preparing for the most important day of my life. Instead, I was alone, scrolling through increasingly vicious social media comments about the rehearsal dinner video that had now been viewed over 1 million times. My phone rang. Julian. Evie, darling, I just heard. Are you okay? No, I'm not okay. Nathan cancelled our wedding. I'm coming over. Julian, I don't think I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up before I could protest. Part of me was grateful for his support, but another part, a part that was growing stronger by the minute, wondered if his presence would make things worse. While I waited, I tried to piece together what had happened. Nathan had seemed upset at the rehearsal dinner, but upset enough to call off our entire wedding. It seemed extreme, even for him. I opened my laptop and began crafting a social media post to control the narrative. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns. Nathan and I have decided to postpone our wedding to focus on personal growth and communication. We appreciate everyone's love and support during this time. I read it over several times, then deleted it. It sounded hollow, even to me. Julian arrived with coffee and croissants from our favorite bakery, the one where we used to meet when we were dating. He was dressed casually but perfectly, as always, and his presence filled my small apartment with familiar energy. Talk to me, he said, settling beside me on the couch. I don't understand what happened. Yes, Nathan was upset about you walking me down the aisle, but to cancel everything, it's so extreme. Maybe it's not about the wedding, Julian said gently. Maybe it's about him realizing you two aren't compatible. We are compatible. We were together for 3 years. Were you, though? Really together? Julian touched my hand. Evie, you've been holding back parts of yourself throughout this entire relationship, the parts that matter most. That's not true, isn't it? You've been trying to fit yourself into his narrow vision of what a wife should be, suppressing your creativity, your passion, your authentic connections. I wanted to argue, but his words resonated with something I'd been feeling for months. Nathan did prefer predictability, routine, traditional relationship structures. He'd never understood my need for emotional complexity, for maintaining meaningful connections with people from my past. He said I was still in love with you, I admitted. Julian was quiet for a moment. Are you? The question hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. I don't know, I said honestly. What we have is so different from what Nathan and I had. More intense, more authentic. More real, Julian agreed. Evie, maybe this is the universe telling you something. Maybe Nathan doing this, as harsh as it seems, is actually freeing you to be with someone who truly understands you. He leaned closer, and for a moment, I thought he might kiss me. The familiar pull was there, the magnetic attraction that had never fully disappeared. But then my phone rang, jolting me back to reality. My mother. Evelune, darling, what's happening? I just got a call from the florist saying the wedding is cancelled. Nathan called it off, Mom. What? Why would he do that? He thinks I'm still in love with Julian. There was a pause. Well, are you? The question, coming from my mother, caught me off guard. Clara had always supported my unconventional choices, but there was something different in her tone now. It's complicated. No, sweetheart, it's not. Either you want to marry Nathan or you don't. Either you love him more than Julian or you don't. Why does everything have to be binary? Because that's what marriage is. It's choosing one person completely and exclusively. If you can't do that, then maybe Nathan was right to end this. After she hung up, I sat staring at my phone, Julian's arm around my shoulders. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, claustrophobic. I need some air, I said, standing up abruptly. Want me to come with you? No, I need to think. I walked around my neighborhood for 2 hours, my mind spinning with questions I couldn't answer. By the time I returned home, Julian was gone, but he'd left a note. Evie, take all the time you need to process this, but remember, some doors only open once. Don't let fear keep you from walking through them. J. That evening, alone in my apartment, I tried calling Nathan one more time. This time, instead of going to voicemail, a recorded message informed me that the number was no longer in service. He'd changed his phone number. On our wedding day. As I sat surrounded by wedding gifts that would need to be returned, RSVPs that would need explanations, and a future that had evaporated in a single morning, I finally began to understand the magnitude of what had happened. Nathan hadn't just cancelled our wedding. He'd erased me from his life completely. And for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I wondered if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. 3 weeks after the cancelled wedding, I was sitting in a lawyer's office, trying to understand how my life had unraveled so completely. The attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chen, slid a thick envelope across her mahogany desk. This arrived by courier this morning, she said, from Nathan Cole's legal representation. Inside were documents that made my hands shake as I read them. A formal dissolution of our shared assets, cancellation of joint accounts, return of the engagement ring I'd somehow forgotten I was still wearing. And something else. Something that made my stomach drop. A non-disclosure agreement. I looked up at Patricia. He wants me to sign an NDA? Preventing you from discussing your relationship publicly, yes. In exchange, he's agreeing to cover all wedding cancellation costs and won't pursue damages for breach of contract on various vendor agreements you both signed. Damages? The country club alone is seeking $20,000 in cancellation fees. The photographer, florist, caterer, it adds up quickly. I stared at the papers, trying to process what this meant. So if I don't sign this, I could be sued? Potentially, yes, Mr. Cole's attorney has been very thorough in documenting the financial impact of the last-minute cancellation. But if I do sign it, I can't talk about what happened. Not publicly. No social media posts, no interviews, no public statements about your relationship or its end. The irony was devastating. For weeks, I'd been trying to control the narrative around our breakup, crafting careful posts about mutual decisions and personal growth. Now, Nathan was taking away my voice entirely. There's something else, Patricia said, pulling out another document. He's also requesting that you cease all contact with his family members and mutual friends. He can't legally enforce that. No, but he can make it clear that continued contact will be considered harassment. Given the circumstances, most courts would view that sympathetically. I left the lawyer's office feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Nathan wasn't just ending our relationship, he was systematically removing me from every aspect of the life we'd built together. My phone buzzed with a text from Julian. "Lunch, you sound like you need to talk." We met at the same restaurant where we'd held our disastrous engagement party. The irony wasn't lost on me. "You look terrible," Julian said, which was his version of sympathy. "I feel terrible. Nathan's trying to make me sign an NDA. About what?" "About everything. Our relationship, the breakup, all of it." Julian frowned. "Can he do that?" "Apparently. If I don't sign, I could be on the hook for tens of thousands in wedding cancellation fees." "That's manipulative." "Is it? Or is it just protecting himself from further humiliation?" Julian looked surprised. "You're defending him." "I'm trying to understand him. For 3 years, I thought Nathan was predictable, maybe even boring. But this is strategic, calculated. He's 3 steps ahead of me on everything. So don't sign it, fight back." "With what? I don't have $20,000 to cover cancellation fees. I can't afford a legal battle." "Then sign it and move on. You're better off without him anyway." I studied Julian's face, looking for something I couldn't quite name. "Are you happy about this?" "Happy that you're free?" "Yes." "Happy that Nathan's been humiliated, that our relationship imploded?" Julian shrugged. "I'm happy that you're finally available to explore what we could be together." The casual way he said it made something click into place. "You planned this?" "What?" "The engagement party toast, the soul partner's comment at the rehearsal dinner. You knew exactly what you were doing." "Evie, you're being paranoid." "Am I?" "You've been pushing boundaries since the moment Nathan and I got engaged. Every comment, every gesture, every time you inserted yourself into our relationship, you were trying to break us up." Julian's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Maybe I was trying to save you from making a mistake. Or maybe you were trying to win a game I didn't even know we were playing." "There's no game, Evie. There's just the truth. You were never fully committed to Nathan because you were never fully over me. And you made sure of that. I made sure you stayed connected to your authentic self." I stared at him across the table, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. The charm, the intensity, the way he made everything about him feel more important than anything else. It was all manipulation. Sophisticated, subtle manipulation, but manipulation nonetheless. "I need to go," I said, standing up. "Evie, wait. Don't let pride keep you from..." "From what?" "From being your backup plan, your ego boost." "From being happy." I was happy with Nathan, and you couldn't stand it." I left him sitting at the table and drove home through tears I couldn't stop. Everything was falling apart, and I was finally beginning to understand my role in the destruction. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the NDA spread out in front of me. My signature would mean accepting Nathan's version of events, admitting that I'd caused enough damage to warrant legal intervention. But it would also mean freedom from the financial consequences of my choices. I signed it. The next morning, I received a final envelope by courier. Inside was my engagement ring, the beautiful vintage sapphire Nathan had chosen because he said it reminded him of my eyes. and a cashier's check covering all outstanding wedding expenses. There was also a brief note, written in Nathan's careful handwriting. Evelune, I hope you find what you're looking for. I'm grateful for the good times we shared, and I wish you happiness. Please respect my need for space and privacy as I move forward. Nathan. It was kind, dignified, and final. Everything Nathan was, and everything I'd failed to appreciate. I held the ring up to the light, watching it sparkle the way it had the night he'd proposed. He'd been so nervous, so hopeful, so certain that I was the person he wanted to spend his life with. I'd thrown it all away for the illusion of something more exciting, more dramatic, more worthy of social media attention. As I put the ring back in its box, I realized that Nathan had gotten his revenge after all. Not through anger or cruelty, but through dignity and legal precision. He'd made me disappear from his life as completely as I'd made him disappear from mine. And unlike my betrayal, his was entirely justified. 6 months after the wedding that never happened, I was a ghost in my own life, jobless, friendless, and bound by an NDA that kept me silent while the internet feasted on my humiliation. Julian had already moved on, the thrill gone once the affair became ordinary. On a rainy Thursday, a courier delivered an envelope from Nathan's law firm. Inside, a short letter informing me the NDA had expired, and a flash drive containing his side of the story, screenshots, photos, unsent emails, a meticulous timeline. Everything that proved I'd been emotionally checked out for months, complaining about Nathan to Julian, letting Julian poison my view of the man who'd loved me steadily. Nathan could have leaked it all the moment I ran back to Julian at the altar. Instead, he'd waited, protected me, and now handed me the choice: speak, or let the truth speak for itself. He'd also returned the silver locket I'd given him years ago, still holding our happy second date photo. By morning, the contents were everywhere. Justice for Nathan trended globally. The evidence was undeniable. I'd been cruel, narcissistic, manipulative. Nathan had been patient, loyal, heartbroken. My career ended, my reputation shattered, my family distanced themselves. But the deepest cut wasn't the public scorn. It was finally seeing the truth Nathan had forced upon me. I hadn't left a boring fiancé for passion. I'd abandoned a good man for attention, and I'd lost the best thing I'd ever had. Nathan's revenge wasn't loud or vicious. It was quiet, precise, and devastating. He made me look in the mirror and recognize the villain. And no amount of likes, drama, or second chances with Julian could ever undo that.